Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about building strength versus demonstrating strength, because it's something that we do have to talk about if we're going to discuss strength and strength standards and all of that. All right, building strength is largely about building muscle mass, right? Maximizing hypertrophy, and then working on your neural drive by learning to lift really, really heavy. Okay. Now, there can be a degree of overlap because obviously done with enough volume, heavy lifting can stimulate significant muscle growth. And even to some extent, taking your big exercises close to failure can still have some neural drive carryover. Right? In other words, doing a heavy 8-rep set of benching, if the last rep is really heavy and you probably couldn't do a ninth, well, that is going to have some carryover, right? There's going to be some similarities there in terms of the neural adaptation. And people do have to understand that. They have to remember that there's a large amount of overlap there. But I think one of the big things that we have to think about when building strength is that we really are trying to get as big as possible, right? I'm not even talking about training strength, because the other would be training strength, but to build your strength base, you need to get thick, right? We have to gain muscle mass, and it's largely irrelevant. It's completely irrelevant that there's some person out there who pound for pound is really strong. That does not change your structure, your biomechanics, anything else. And I think what people often fail to realize, the majority of these guys who are very strong, for their body weight, they're usually really short. And that's very obvious basic physics. And then you get around them and you realize it. And we see that even with some of the influencers and stuff. And again, there are exceptions because there are guys who are just that good. I mean, John Hack would be an exception, obviously. But I'm not talking about that here. I'm not talking about these outliers. I'm talking about on average. And so, for example, if a guy is 5'4", the guy looks really stacked in pictures or video for his body weight. You're like, man, that guy only weighs whatever. Well, he's probably really short. But we see that with the influencers, particularly, the bodybuilding side. You see that most of them are a lot shorter than you think they are till you meet them. On average, 3-4 inches shorter than you expect them to be. So what happens accordingly? Well, obviously, they're able to be stronger. Why? Because a larger percentage of their body weight, at that same body weight, would be muscle tissue. Their skeleton weighs less. It takes less room to fill their frame out. And then they're moving the weight a shorter distance. Okay. In other words, you need less total muscle mass to bench, 315, if your arms are 4 inches shorter than if they were 4 inches longer. Right? It is simply an easier lift from a biomechanics perspective, from a distance moved. And you learn to arch a little bit on top of that. You can cut that range of motion way down, right? The range of motion absolutely matters when it comes to strength and how much weight you can move. There's a reason powerlifters go out of their way to cut so much range of motion. So on that topic, if we're trying to demonstrate strength, when we're demonstrating strength, it's usually a comparative analysis between you and someone else. It is compared to another person. So then rules are standardized. Right, you're competing on the same lift. So, for example, obviously, if you want to compare bench presses, they need to be paused, not bounce. Butt needs to stay on the bench, so on and so forth. Right? You have to have similar rules, or else you can't compare the strength of two people. How much force are they producing? Well, accordingly, once you have the rules in place for your demonstration of strength, because if we remove any rules, then, before long, people are lifting 1,000 pounds on a lift that in a standardized environment, they can only lift 600. Right? If we just remove all standards, an above the knee rack pull, for example. Guys up here doing above the knee rack pulls with 800 pounds and straps, who can barely deadlift 500, if that. Right? So what I mean is we need some standardization, obviously. But then once people standardize it, if you're going to demonstrate strength, you're going to game the system. Okay, if your goal is to hit the biggest lift possible, you're going to say, what can I do to cut range of motion? What can I do to take the muscles out at their worst leverage positions? Well, on a bench press, for example, that's when you touch the chest. The further your pecs are stretched, the lower your elbows go, guess what? Pecs at a mechanical disadvantage. Now, that's great for building muscle, but it's not so great if your goal is to lift as much weight as you can possibly lift. You want to reduce that. You want to keep those elbows higher. You want to find positions to get the elbows higher through any means necessary. That means arching, finding a grip width that helps. Right? Do whatever it takes. Anything to reduce that tension at the bottom. This is why elbow sleeves add so much to a max bench. They give you external tension at the most difficult part. Okay? So that's what you do. Same thing with a squatting. What would you want to do? Well, you want to take a stance that lets you reduce knee travel. Why? Quads are the biggest muscle involved in the squat. The more your knee bends, the more you're at a mechanical disadvantage. So if your goal, if the rules say you got to hit parallel, well, when you find a stance and a position that allows you to bend the knee the least, your hips reach parallel with less range of motion for one, right? Because the further your knee bends, the further your knee slides forward. What happens? Parallel shifts. Your hips have to get even deeper to get to parallel then. Well, that's not always good. We've got to increase range of motion. Okay, so anything you can do to bend the knee less puts the quads at a less disadvantaged position. That bottom deep stretch of the quads is great for building them. But it's going to reduce the amount of weight you can squat if you're trying to demonstrate strength. Now, if you want to build it, though, it's a good idea to build those quads up. All right? So people see where we're going with this? This is where size versus strength breaks down. This is where training for size versus training for strength breaks down in these demonstrations, because size will always raise your strength ceiling. But then you got neural drive and technique. You do probably need to practice these more advantaged positions. Wouldn't be a bad idea if you're trying to maximize strength. So understand what the difference is. Understand what the difference is here, because this is an important distinction. But we come over to the other point. Person can train kind of like a bodybuilder and just get as jacked as possible and then find these leverage advantages. Well, that is actually a very viable way of building strength and then demonstrating it later. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.